Whole new season beginning.
Let's go. You liked it.
I'm absent-minded, mentally slaughtering all my enemies. I'm murdering recklessly. Man, these streets ain't no sesame. Another notch on my felony list. I'm not wasting.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Indian Nation Station pregame show. I am your host, the looks, AJ Ganger. Joining me, as always, the brains, Brian Gillespie, for another great edition of the Indian Nation Station pregame show. Tonight, 8th-seeded Tigers of Cincinnati Withrow will come to town for a second-round matchup against our Piqua Indians, who have had a one-week-at-a-time mentality all season long. And you kind of have to now that it's your second season. It's win or go home.
I'll tell you what, it's all on the line every week. You have to come ready to play. Of course, we never have to worry about that because Coach Neitz always has the preparation that separates them from other teams. Is the level of preparation both the coaches and players go through. I have no doubt that we're ready to play this week.
I hope so as well. Let's take a look at some of the scores from around Week 11. Withrow beat the 9th-seeded Troy Trojans 29-9. Stebbins beat Tays Valley. You called that one multiple times, 41-27. Edgewood with the 37-10 victory over Sydney. Kings beating Lima Senior 50-6. Winton Woods 46, Turpin 29. Anderson, I feel so bad for Xenia. Anderson just romped Xenia 49-6. LaSalle with the win over Harrison 42-14. In Division 3, Region 12, Baden beat Butler 37-0. Tip beat Mount Healthy 50-6, and we did have one 16 seed out of the whole state beat a number 1 seed. That was in Division 4, Region 14. Milan Edison beat the 1-seeded Bellevue 23-22.
That must be a pretty good bracket because, I mean, if your 16 seed is 5-5 for the year, or even with 4 wins, slightly below the 500 mark, you're looking at that was a rematch of a regular season game. It was pretty close, I believe, too, that Edison had just come up short. So that's a huge upset right there.
What are some of the thoughts that you have looking through these scores from last week?
Well, I'll tell you what first pops off the sheet here is the Withrow Troy game was almost exact same scores of Piqua Troy game.
Yeah.
Now, of course, circumstances were different. The rain was much worse. Mm-hmm. The game was 28-7 when Piqua played. Then probably could have been a lot more if you had a normal weather situation. But Withrow, don't put anything past them. They come into this game with Piqua with 6 shutouts this year. Now, they didn't play a very good schedule, but if you look at Piqua's schedule and Withrow's schedule, neither played a really difficult schedule. Both had one big game. The difference is Piqua beat Tip in their big game. Now, Piqua played a few better teams than what Withrow did after that big game. Withrow lost their big game to Taft. So now I will say they have not given up more than 13 points in any game this year. So that's something to keep an eye on. Who's going to win this? Is it going to be a defensive struggle, or is it going to be like every other game that Piqua's played this year? The other team looks solid on paper, at least most of them, and then it turns out to be a whole different ballgame.
Another thing to factor into, you mentioned the rain. When Piqua played at Troy on a real grass field, it was raining. Troy played at Withrow on an artificial field while it was raining. So that could have maybe changed a couple things around.
I'll tell you what, Troy wishes that they would have had their grass field to slow this Withrow team down, because they have some pretty good athletes there in the backfield.
Yeah.
That if you let them loose, they're going to take advantage, and they did that to Troy last week.
And Withrow's got such a beautiful stadium too. I saw some pictures of that stadium. That's an insane looking stadium.
Well, I believe it's a former college. They got moved to a high school, and you go there and you go, wow, it feels like a college. I've been there a few times for basketball games, and you go in there and you go, whoa, man, what a school. And then you realize it's a high school, and you're like, wow, I'd like to play here.
Yeah.
That's a nice place.
Yeah. Well, before we take a look at some stats from last week's game against Little Miami, we want to remind everybody that tonight's game against Cincinnati Withrow will be live on the Indian Nation Station's YouTube channel, I should say. The link will be posted today around noon, probably a little bit earlier than that, with the hype video. It'll be posted as well on my Twitter page, Ganger8002 on Twitter, and the Piqua Athletics Twitter page as well. Well, Brian, it was a really, really good game last Friday night. Even though we started a little slow in that first quarter, we ended up beating Little Miami. I think it was 49-7, 556 total yards with 289 through the air. Brady Uhl again, 18 of 20 in the ring.
72, almost 73% passing efficiency for Brady this year. That's incredible. That does not to mention that he also rushed for 123 yards and a touchdown.
He had more rushing
carries.
Yards than Josiah did, and Josiah had 17 carries.
Again, this is where you get to a situation where you see why it's so difficult with Piqua. First of all, they play good, solid defense. They shut you down. They make you work to score any points that you get. And when you do score points, you give it back to them, and they score in 3 plays.
Yeah.
And that is just demoralizing. I mean, Josiah, I felt like I was watching, go, man, it's not a big game for Josiah. And then you look down, 17 carries for 101 yards. Most running backs would love to have 101 yards on 17 carries, almost 6 yards per carry. That's like a half a carry drop off for him.
Yeah.
He was only, he's usually averaging 12. His season mark now is up down to 10.8 yards per carry. He's also got 31 touchdowns. He's only 7 short. Earlier in the season, I had thought never could he catch Brandon Sain's record, but he's only 7 touchdowns short of that record, closer and closer, while also sitting 5th all-time on yards rushing in the season now.
And he's 7 touchdowns short in just 10 games.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, if he gets if he gets 3 more games, I think there's no doubt he's going to catch it.
Oh, I believe so too.
I think he'll get a couple this week. Of course, the opponents get more and more difficult.
Yeah.
But if you have to deal with a guy like Brady Uhl lighting you up through the air, hitting every receiver right on the mark, now you got to think about that. So when you go to think about that, then you got over here, now we get Josiah get the ball, kick out, 67-yard touchdown. It's a lot to deal with as a defensive coordinator.
We did also average 14.5 yards per catch that we had. The one thing, too, I want to point out, it's been a thing all year long. We had 11 penalties for 85 yards.
Yeah, you can't say that enough, and I'm sure the coaches are saying that a lot.
Yeah.
But it's just not getting through to these guys. They have got to play. There's going to be a time in the next couple weeks, if they get past Withrow, where they're going to need to play close to perfect.
Yes.
And you cannot have 5, 6, 10 penalties and beat an Anderson, or 10 penalties and beat a LaSalle, or even Edgewood if Edgewood gets past Stebbins this week and we get past Withrow. Even that game, you need to be sharp, because every game, as you get farther and farther, you're playing a good team, a great team every week.
Yeah.
So you gotta sharpen, up a little bit, and not, those penalties are going to end up costing you a game at some point if you keep it up.
Well, a couple other people who had big games. Obviously, Corey Miller with 5 catches, 34 yards, a touchdown. Ryan Brown, 4 catches for 97. Colton Booker, 2 for 23, a touchdown. Also had 5 tackles on defense. Elijah Frazier with the 2 catches for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. So both times he touched the ball, he was in the end zone. And Sam Schmeezing as well, all year, 7 tackles, a big game from him as well. It was kind of a drop-off for Landon Hare on the defensive line. And I think that was because of the quick pass ability of Little Miami.
Well, Little Miami, now, again, the receivers couldn't catch the ball.
Oh, gosh, no.
They couldn't catch a cold in that game, and it was pouring rain out. So, I mean, you got to feel for their quarterback because he was right on the money with all his throws. Those guys dropped a touchdown. One dropped a deep touchdown. There were probably 8 to 10 drops in that game.
Oh, yeah.
And defensively, offensively, you just can't hold up against a team like Piqua if you're making those errors. But, you got to keep an eye out. I mean, Piqua's incredible stats for their receivers. Can't get over the fact that 6 receivers have 2 touchdowns or more. Yeah. So who's he going to throw it to? From week to week, it's somebody different. So you can't just say, okay, we're going to tilt the defense towards this guy and make sure we bracket him, because it doesn't really matter. He doesn't care who he throws it to. He throws it to the guy that's open, and the guy that open makes plays. Our guys catch the ball, and when they do catch it, every one of them, I've seen huge strides from Ryan Brown and Elijah Frazier during the season. They looked a little out of place early in the year. They struggled a little bit. But, man, as the year has gone on, those guys have become just as electric as Drayshawn and those other guys and Corey Miller. So now, okay, who do we cover? Well, maybe we need to go zone. Well, if you go zone, now he just picks you apart in the middle. So I'll tell you what, Withrow's probably thinking, let's stop the run. Well, then look what happened last week. So they got to figure something out. We're a different challenge than any team they've seen on their schedule.
And the other thing, too, is if you get pressure on Brady, he's more than likely just going to take off running, and he's going to gain 10, 12, maybe more yards than that as well.
I'll tell you what, watching him on video, you don't realize how fast that guy is until he goes past you.
Yeah.
You think, oh, he's all right runner, he's not great, and then it's boom. He's gone. Yes. And you're like, wait, what the heck just happened? And he would run past you for a touchdown. He did that to Little Miami like they were standing still.
Yeah, yes, he did. Well, let's take a moment and thank our sponsors again for the 21-22 school year. Kathy Henney, Elite ETC, Dick Lumpkins, Morris Comfort Systems, Harmony Systems, Little Caesars, Edison State Community College, Employ Bridge Resource Manufacturing, Dr. Littlejohn, and Crayex Corp. Thank you for all your support throughout the entire 21-22 school year. Now we get into week 12, round 2 of the regional playoffs here. Some of the games that we have in Division 2. We have Piqua taking on Withrow here. Stebbins travels to Edgewood to take on Edgewood. Kings at home against Whitten Woods. And the Spectrum game of the week, Anderson at home against LaSalle, as well as Tip City playing Alter in Division 3. Tip City gets a home game, Piqua gets a home game. And again, one of the games to look out for, I think, is that Anderson-LaSalle game.
Well, certainly, those are two of the best teams in the region, no matter seed. And what's interesting about those two games on the other side of the bracket, those are rematches from last year's playoffs. They were the semifinals in the regional to go to the finals, and then eventually LaSalle got out. So both those teams last year, LaSalle beat Anderson and Whitten Woods beat Kings. But now the tide has flipped a little bit. This year, Kings has a better record. Kings has a better seed. So it'll be interesting to see if Whitten Woods can get them again or Kings get some retribution. And Anderson, they're going to have to play a really good game to get past LaSalle. I'm calling the over-under at 80 there because I think they'll probably that's going to be a high-scoring matchup.
Definitely a shootout. The one thing, too, that I think, Stebbins, if they can score as many points as they did last week and play the same way, I think they got a good shot at beating Edgewood.
As I suspected, Tays Valley was way overseeded, and it ended up playing out like that. Edgewood is not. I think Edgewood, the reason they're seated where they are is because they're rock solid, they're fundamental, they're disciplined defensively, they're disciplined offensively. I don't know that Stebbins is going to be able to score on them. Like, Stebbins looked really good scoring the ball a lot of games, but when they met Piqua, not a lot of points. So, and Piqua's got a similar defense to it like an Edgewood. So I think Stebbins is going to have a hard time scoring enough points. Now, Edgewood just grinds it out with 3 running backs.
Yeah.
The wing tees type stuff, and they'll grind you out. So Stebbins is going to have to stack the box and hope for the best. But I don't see them having quite enough to get Edgewood there at Edgewood.
They're going to have to get their defense off the field because that wing tee offense, you can hold the ball for an entire quarter and a half if you
those
really
games
want
go
to.
by in a blink. You look up and it's halftime.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Brian, we are moving in again. Tonight's game will be live on YouTube. the Indian Nation Station's YouTube channel. Piqua hosted second playoff game in a row against a one-loss Cincinnati Withrow Tigers. Their only loss in the year came to Taft back on September 25th, 13-7. This will also be their second MVL opponent in a row in the 2021 playoffs. We know how focused Piqua is going to this game, Brian, but what can we expect from this Withrow team?
Well, Withrow only gives up, if you look at per game, they're giving up 3.8 points per game. If you stretch that out, they have 6 shutouts, and they've only given up 38 points in 10 games. So on its face, you go, wow, that's pretty impressive. Now, if you look at their schedule, again, lots of teams that were 2-3 games under 500 for the year, some that were winless. Now they have 2 opponents in common. Both of them played Troy, both of them played Belmont. As I mentioned earlier, the scores against Troy were almost identical, 29-7, 28-7. And then Belmont, they beat Belmont. Now, Belmont had some games in them. They were at about mid-season, 34-0. Piqua beat Belmont 54-0, but it could have been much worse in that game. But that was Belmont's first game. So matching up opponents, similar situations there. We're looking at a team that Withrow that loves to run the ball. Probably 60% of the time the ball is on the ground for them. So they've got a quarterback who's used to play wide receiver. So I don't see more than 10 passes in this game, 10 to 12 passes. Their running back is their guy. His name is Tyrus Stevenson. He's a senior, top rusher in the conference, the Cincinnati Metro Athletic Conference. He tore up Trotwood to the tune of 256 yards and a touchdown on 21 carries. Those are Josiah Medley-like numbers with 12 yards per carry. So, and Troy's defense is no pushover. They're pretty solid. So, and then you have their quarterback, number 1, Antoinez Fant, who added 78 yards on the ground and a touchdown on just 8 carries. So the key here for Piqua is, how do we close down those gaps for their running? How do we have eye discipline so we stick with a guy and don't go for the fake? You got to now keep in mind they put the ball on the ground a lot. They have real issues with their quarterback or their center quarterbacks exchange on the snap. So Piqua's got to get in there and get one of those because their ball's going to hit the ground a few times at least in this game. So if Piqua can get in there and get one of those turnovers and get a scoop and score maybe even, that will turn the tide. But it's going to be very interesting because this is a school that does not have a lot of history with Withrow in success. They did win one game. They beat Fairborn in the first round last year of the playoffs. Now, everybody made the playoffs last year, so that's kind of misleading. But legitimately, it's been a really long time since they've been in the postseason. And last year, I think, was their first ever postseason win, if I looked at their history correctly. So they don't have a lot of history there. The discipline will be on Piqua's side. I think they're a little bit more disciplined the way they do things, but they're going to have to slow down that running game to have a chance in this one because they put up 60 points on some teams. I mean, they can rack some points up if you can't stop the run. And what happens when you run the ball a lot, the clock dry, you don't get to touch the ball enough.
Right. So
you gotta make sure you slow down both Stevenson and Fant. If you do that, Piqua's going to be in pretty good shape.
It seems like it's a matchup of 2 great offenses that can score in a blink and 2 great defenses that can hold opponents to under 7 points. They keep them out of the end zone.
On paper, it's a very intriguing matchup. Do I think it's going to be like that on the field? That remains to be seen. But if you look at paper-wise, they're about as good a match for Piqua as 9-1 versus 10-0. Stats are similar. The difference here is Piqua is multi-dimensional on offense. So if you slow our running game down as they did for a little bit last week, we'll just pick you apart.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be easy for Withrow. They can't focus on one thing. That probably will set Piqua apart in this game.
What's their defense looking like, Brian? Withrow's defense?
Rugged, tough. They fill the gaps. They're athletic. They can chase you down. They make things difficult for you. So I think, again, Piqua you pick your poison on what you want to stop. If you can stop it all, more power to you. But they definitely probably they have a lot of good athletes. But I don't know that they have enough structure, discipline, all those types of things that will get them to beat Piqua this week.
Anything else you'd like to add, Brian, before we get out of here?
A couple of things about Withrow, a couple of famous alumni.
Yeah.
Ronnie Oster. I know most of you kids out there, if you're watching this, have no idea who that is. Famous Reds infielder, and he was in the organization for quite a long time. He went to Withrow way back in the day. Also, famous NBA player Tyrone Hill. Another guy was late 90s, early 2000s, played for the Sixers and a variety of other teams. So they have some famous alumni. And then they had a kid named Eddie Beeman back in the 70s who got recruited by Ohio State. Check out these stats. He had 320 tackles, including 150 tackles for a loss and 80 sacks in 3 years for Withrow in the 70s.
That is insane.
80 sacks. You don't see those numbers ever.
How were they throwing the ball in the 70s?
I don't know, but they must have been standing back there forever. Unless nobody was there blocking them, because 80 sacks and 150 tackles for a loss is outrageous.
That is insane.
So,
well, we want to thank everybody again for watching. We will keep everybody updated if we do end up advancing to next week's round, which would be the regional semifinals and starts the neutral site games. We will keep everybody updated on coverage of those games. Again, we'll try to cover it unless Spectrum is there live. If not, it will be delayed. Or in the case of all of our away games this year, it will be the condensed version that will be posted on Monday afternoon. Again, pay attention to our social media accounts. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Ring the bell to get notified every time we post a new video or go live. Stay tuned for the game coming up next with Tom Michaels and the Brains, Brian Gillespie on the call. And Beauty. For Brian, I'm AJ Ganger saying good night, ladies and gentlemen. Go Piqua and beat Withrow.